She refused to give up her seat but never expected the backlash to change her life forever. The subway car hummed with the sounds of an early morning commute, tired sighs, the rustling of newspapers, and the faint screech of wheels against the tracks. It was a weekday in Washington, D.C., and the platform at DuPont Circle was already a sea of bodies, each person jostling for space, trying to carve out a pocket of calm in the chaos. Among them stood Layla, a 14-year-old with a backpack slung over her shoulder and earbuds trailing from her pocket. She wasn't particularly remarkable to most passers-by, just a girl on her way to school, likely rehearsing algebra equations in her head. But today, she would become the focal point of a story that no one in that subway car would forget. When the train doors opened, Layla stepped in, scanning the crowded car for a place to sit. Her eyes landed on an empty seat between two strangers. It was unoccupied, save for the oversized purse belonging to the middle-aged woman beside it. Layla approached, giving the woman a polite smile. "Excuse me, ma'am, may I sit there?" The woman barely glanced at her. "It's taken," she snapped, pulling the purse closer as if Layla's presence itself was a threat. The tension was instant, the kind of tension you could feel ripple through a crowd even when no one says a word. Layla hesitated, looking around. The other passengers shifted uncomfortably, their faces a mix of concern and unease, but no one spoke up. Layla stood her ground. "There's no one here," she said softly, her voice carrying just enough courage to cut through the silence. The woman's lips tightened, her voice rising slightly. "I said, it's taken. Go find another seat." Layla stayed where she was. She wasn't trying to cause a scene, but something inside it. Her refuse to back down. It wasn't just about the seat anymore. It was about what this moment represented. Still, she didn't argue. Instead, she stood there, the quiet weight of her resolve louder than any protest. But the subway car was no longer just a subway car. It had become a stage, and though Layla didn't know it yet, someone had started recording. "What's the problem here?" a man nearby finally asked. His voice wasn't confrontational, but it carried a weight of authority. The woman bristled, turning her glare toward him. "It's my seat, and I have the right to decide who sits here." Her voice was sharp, defensive, but her words hung in the air, exposing more than she intended. Passengers exchanged glances, some shocked, others just tired of witnessing the familiar scene play out yet again. No one spoke immediately, but the subtle shift in their body language spoke volumes. Layla's cheeks burned, but she didn't lower her gaze. Instead, she stood tall, her backpack still slung over one shoulder, and waited. The train lurched forward, but the moment felt frozen, as if time itself had paused to capture every detail. But this was just the beginning. Something about this quiet standoff was different. It was as though the air had changed, charged with an energy that hinted this wasn't going to end here. The subway car rocked gently as it sped through the tunnels, but the air inside felt heavy. People who had initially avoided looking now turned their attention to the unfolding scene. Layla's presence, calm yet firm, was an unspoken challenge to the woman's authority over that empty seat. But the woman, whose name would later be revealed as Cynthia, wasn't backing down. "I don't know why you're still standing there," Cynthia said, her voice dripping with irritation. "There are plenty of other places to stand." Layla didn't respond immediately. Her face remained calm, but the slight twitch of her fingers gripping the strap of her backpack betrayed her tension. She took a small step back, not retreating, but giving herself just enough room to breathe. A young man seated across the aisle shifted in his seat, pulling out his phone. His screen reflected the scene, Cynthia's rigid posture, her purse clutched like a shield, and Layla standing tall. His thumbs moved quickly as he began recording, quietly capturing the moment. "Seriously?" Cynthia hissed, noticing the phone. "You're recording this?" For what? For accountability, the young man shot back. His tone was casual, but there was an edge to it. People should see this. Cynthia scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest. See what? A spoiled teenager thinking she can get whatever she wants? That struck a nerve. A woman a few seats down, dressed in scrubs, finally spoke up. It's not about the seat. It's about how you're treating her. The tension shifted again, like the crack of ice underfoot. Cynthia's gaze darted around the car, searching for an ally, but most of the passengers either avoided her eyes or stared back with quiet disapproval, her face flushed with a mix of anger and embarrassment. Layla took a deep breath. I didn't mean to cause trouble, she said softly, her voice steady despite the tremble she felt inside. I just wanted to sit down. Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that silenced the murmurs in the car. For a moment, it seemed as though the confrontation might end there. But Cynthia wasn't ready to let it go. This generation, she muttered loudly, shaking her head. No respect, no patience, always playing the victim. Layla's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. The young man with the phone, however, wasn't letting it slide. You're the only one causing a scene, he said, his voice louder now. Just let her sit. The subway car jolted as it pulled into the next station. A few passengers shuffled off, but more eyes joined the audience as new riders stepped in. Layla hesitated for a moment, then made a decision. She turned, walking toward a pole to steady herself. But before she reached it, a woman in a business suit who had been watching quietly stood up. Take my seat, she said, her voice firm but kind. You deserve better than this. Layla nodded her thanks, sinking into the seat with a quiet relief. But the story wasn't over. As the train doors closed and it rumbled forward, the tension lingered. Cynthia's defiant posture didn't soften, and the young man continued filming, now narrating in a low voice. Mom, why didn't you just let her sit? She asked, the disappointment cutting deeper than any online comment. For days, Cynthia remained holed up in her home, blinds drawn, TV off, the outside world feeling like a hostile force. She replayed the moment in her head again and again, trying to justify her actions. But the more she thought about it, the harder it was to hold on to her sense of righteousness. The anger she felt wasn't just about the video. It was about the mirror it held up to her. And as the days turned into a week, she couldn't ignore the reflection staring back at her any longer. For Layla, the morning subway incident was a fleeting moment, awkward and uncomfortable, but not entirely unfamiliar. She'd experienced dismissive behavior before, though it rarely left such a lasting impression. By the time she arrived at school that day, she had pushed it to the back of her mind, focusing instead on a science quiz and a lunchtime debate with friends about the best flavor of chips. Tea wasn't. Until later that evening, as she sat on the couch with her mom, scrolling through her phone, that the weight of the moment came rushing back. A notification popped up, a tagged post from a classmate. Curious, she clicked on it. The caption read, "Look at this queen staying calm under pressure," followed by several fire emojis. Layla froze as the video began to play. There she was, standing in the subway car, her quiet defiance captured from multiple angles. Her heart raced as she watched the scene unfold, her voice barely audible but unmistakably steady. The comments beneath the video were overwhelming, a flood of praise for her composure, condemnation for the woman's behavior, and stories from others who had faced similar experiences. Wow, so much grace for someone so young. This young girl is going to change the world someday. Reminds me of something that happened to me last year. I wish I'd been as brave. Layla's mom, sitting nearby, noticed her reaction. What's wrong, sweetie? She asked, leaning over to glance at the screen. Her eyes widened as she took in the video and its rapidly climbing view count. "Is that you?" Layla nodded slowly, her face a mixture of surprise and unease. "I didn't even know someone was filming." Her mom put a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You handled yourself beautifully. I'm proud of you." But pride wasn't the only emotion Layla felt. As the video continued to spread, she found herself the recipient of countless messages, some from supportive strangers, others from classmates who suddenly wanted to be her best friend. Even a local reporter reached out, asking for an interview. Layla wasn't sure how to feel. On one hand, she was grateful for the kindness and encouragement. But on the other, she felt exposed, like a private moment had been turned into a spectacle. She had always been quiet, preferring to express herself through writing rather than speaking. Now people were looking to her for answers, for leadership, for something she wasn't sure she could give. One evening, as she sat at her desk, staring at a blank page in her notebook, her mom knocked softly on the door. "You okay?" she asked. Stepping inside, "I don't know what to say," Layla admitted. "Everyone's expecting me to. I don't know. Do something." Her mom sat on the bed, nodding thoughtfully. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for. But if you feel like this is an opportunity, say something meaningful, then speak your truth. People are listening because you stood up for yourself." That's powerful. The words lingered with Layla long after her mom left the room. That night, she began to write not for the public, but for herself. She wrote about the subway, about the tension she felt, and about the moment she decided not to move. She wrote about what it meant to be seen, to be heard, and to stand to 11 when the world tried to shrink her. But what started as a private reflection soon became something more. Her words, once confined to her notebook, found their way to a larger audience, sparking conversations she never imagined she'd be part of. The video of the subway altercation continued to spread, transcending social media platforms and sparking heated discussions on talk shows, podcasts, and community forums. It wasn't just about Cynthia or Layla, it was about the countless moments like this, moments that went unnoticed, unfilmed, or unspoken. Layla's words, shared in a post her mom encouraged her to upload, struck a chord. "Sometimes, standing still is the loudest thing you can do," she wrote. Her post wasn't long, but it carried a quiet power that resonated with thousands. Stories began pouring in, each one unique, but carrying the same undercurrent of resilience in the face of prejudice. A man in California wrote about being denied service at a diner in the 1970s and how he never spoke, but wished he had. A teenage girl from Texas shared a moment in her school cafeteria when she was asked to leave a table because her kind didn't belong there. The stories weren't always overtly dramatic, but they were real, painting a picture of a society still grappling with the weight of its biases. Cynthia, meanwhile, watched this wave of accountability unfold with growing discomfort. First, she tried to dismiss it all as mob mentality. But as she read some of the stories tied to Layla's post, something inside her shifted. These weren't just random strangers airing grievances. They were human beings whose experiences mirrored her actions in ways she hadn't allowed herself to consider. One afternoon, while scrolling through the latest comments, Cynthia paused on a video. It was a clip of Layla reading an excerpt from her writing a local community event. Her voice was steady, her words clear and thoughtful. "I didn't want to be a symbol," Layla said. "I just wanted to sit. But sometimes, what we want doesn't matter as much as what we need to do. I stood still because I couldn't move forward otherwise." And maybe that's something we all need to think about: when to stand, when to sit, and when to make room for someone else. Cynthia felt a lump in her throat as she closed her laptop. For the first time, she let herself really reflect on it. What had happened, not just the incident on the subway, but the years of small choices and assumptions that had led her to that moment. It wasn't an easy realization, and it wasn't one that came with immediate answers. But it was a start. In the weeks that followed, Cynthia reached out to Layla through a mutual acquaintance. It wasn't an apology exactly, but a gesture, a willingness to learn and listen. Layla, ever thoughtful, agreed to meet her, but only after making it clear that forgiveness wasn't the same as forgetting. Their conversation was brief but meaningful, planting seeds of understanding that neither of them could have imagined on the crowded subway. But the real change wasn't in Cynthia or Layla alone. It was in the ripple effect their story created, pushing others to confront their biases, share their truths, and take steps toward a world where everyone has a seat. Weeks turned into months, but the impact of that subway encounter continued to echo. Layla's voice became a quiet but persistent force in conversations about respect and accountability. She didn't seek fame, but her words became a touchstone for those looking to challenge ingrained biases and build bridges where walls once stood. Her story was featured in a local newspaper, then on a national morning show. Each time she was asked about the moment, she said the same thing. It wasn't about making a statement. It was about standing in my truth. If that helps someone else, then I'm glad. For Cynthia, the path forward was less public, but no less transformative. She began attending workshops on implicit bias and volunteering at a local community center. The first time she walked into one of those meetings, she felt small and exposed, like everyone could see the version of herself she was trying to leave behind. But she stayed listening and learning, taking each step as it came. One day, while organizing books for a community library program, she came across a notebook filled with handwritten stories from local teens. One of them was Layla's. In her words, Cynthia saw not just the girl she had dismissed, but the courage it took to stand still in the face of dismissal. For the first time in a long time, she felt hope, not just for Layla or herself, but for what could happen when people choose to face their reflection and change. The broader impact of their story wasn't measured in hashtags or views, but in the small, quiet ways it shifted the world. In classrooms, kids talked openly about fairness and kindness. On subways, passengers were more likely to offer their seats without hesitation. And in countless homes, families shared stories they had kept hidden for too long, finding healing in the telling. At a community event, months later, Layla stood at a microphone, her notebook in hand. She read a new piece, one that reflected her journey and the unexpected role she had come to embrace. Sometimes the hardest thing is to speak up. Other times, the hardest thing is to stand still and let the silence speak for you. But either way, the courage to face what's wrong and make it right is what changes the world. She looked out at the crowd, her eyes catching Cynthia's. The older woman gave a small, tentative nod. It wasn't much, but it was enough for now. As the event ended, Layla stepped off the stage, surrounded by her family and friends. She smiled, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't expected. Her story wasn't over. It was just one part of a larger conversation that would continue to grow. For everyone who heard it, the message was clear. The smallest actions, the quietest stands, and the simplest truths could ripple out and make a difference. Stories like Layla's remind you of the power of kindness, accountability, and courage in everyday life. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect on how you can make space for others, speak up when it matters, and challenge the biases we all carry. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire change, because together we can build a better world one moment at a time.